Welcome to Shelf Help, a channel dedicated to talking to the void about whatever book I happen to be reading. I'm your host, the reader. The following review will contain spoilers. The land of Mythica is made of 3 kingdoms: Limros, Palacia, and Aranos. Limros is the northernmost kingdom. It has a tundra-like climate and ruled by the King of Blood, Gaius de Moro. Austerity and religious devotion are enforced at the point of a sword. Magnus and Lucia live under their father's dubious love and iron fist. Magnus is the crown prince, as long as he remains in his father's good grace, which in many cases requires him to mimic the king's cruelty. He is also in love with his younger sister. Lucia is sweet, intelligent, and the first sorceress born in 1,000 years. She loves her brother, but not in the way he loves her. She is also adopted, though she doesn't know it for a while. King Demoria took her as his own and hoped she would become his secret weapon in a world without magic. Moving south, we have the kingdom of Palacia. They lost a war with Aranos years ago and agreed to supply Aranos with wine in return for selling them crops. So they converted all their fields to grow grapes. Over time, Aranos pushed down the price of the wine while raising the price of crops, leaving the country destitute and their land depleted. Unlike the other 2 kingdoms, Palacia has a chief instead of a king. They believe their chief to be a great sorcerer who spends his days in meditation, seeking to return the magic to the land. Our main character from this kingdom is Jonas, a peasant. After Aran, a noble from Aranos, murders his brother, he swears vengeance on the entire Aranos royal family. Aranos is the most southern and the richest of the 3 kingdoms. The weather is warm, it has lush vegetation, plenty of crops. They even have enough wealth to wall their royal palace with marble and gold. Our main character from this kingdom is Cleo, the second princess. Her older sister Emilia is the crown princess and is very sick. King of Aranos often refers to his second daughter as a hummingbird, flitting from topic to topic on a whim, which perfectly describes her. Despite not believing in magic, when her sister tells her a story of magic grape seeds that could cure any illness, she hares off to Palacia in search for them. Never mind that she had just been with Aaron when he killed Jonas's brother, and is very recognizable. She's a little on the dumb side, but that's okay. Characters can be dumb. She follows her heart. There's also Sanctuary. We don't see much of this in the story, but it will play a larger role later, I'm sure. Sanctuary is on a different plane of existence, and populated by the Watchers. They can take the form of hawks to spy on the mortal plane. They are in search of the Kindred, 4 magic stones, with the magic of each of the 4 elements. They were lost thousands of years ago, and the longer they're missing, the more magic drains from both worlds. When it is gone, everyone dies. Limros and Palacia look at the riches of Aranos and want them for their own. Aranos has used its wealth to exploit the other kingdoms. Now it's come to war. But the King of Blood isn't interested in sharing the spoils. Magnus and Lucia are the hardest characters to pin down. They want to be good people, but their father's influence keeps slipping through. Magnus has a maid spying for him on the rest of the castle, leading her to believe she will be his future mistress. When she is caught, his father tortures her, and Magnus watches, hoping she will rat him out, but never speaking up for her. Then he gives her a bag of gold and sends her away to keep her from being killed. Meanwhile, Lucia is sweet and kind. She's also willing to do her father's bidding and help him in the war. She even pops up with, if they had just surrendered, no one would have had to die, while actively invading Aranos, which is a complete lack of empathy that was a little jarring for an otherwise kind character. Jonas is probably my favorite. He's the only peasant of the main characters, and has the best motivation, though he finds himself soon to be the chief's son-in-law. He's also working for his people rather than his own ends, And while he does start out only thinking of revenge, his goals do shift with the change of the war. Cleo is clearly the heart of the story. She loves her family and her people, and she feels for the people of the other kingdoms, even if she really has no power to help. This goes a long way to make up for the fact that she doesn't always make the smartest choices. That said, there are a couple of problems here. This is a political fantasy in the vein of Game of Thrones. It's also YA. And I'm sure most people can immediately see the problem with that. While YA is not inherently for children, there are soft limits on what can be included. Game of Thrones has a lot of themes that probably should not be in YA fiction. Like incest. Yeah, this book has incest. Well, aspirational incest. To be fair, Magnus doesn't know Lucia is not his sister, and the only thing that happens is a kiss, and Lucia is not on board with the idea and very quickly squashes it. I'm of two minds here. First, incest is one of those topics that probably should not be in YA fiction. Not that it can't be, but YA has limits on what it can be shown, for lack of a better word, and it's just one of those topics that needs a delicate touch. On the other hand, if you're going to include it, don't pull your punch. That is not to negate my first point, but to say that it was never a mystery that Magnus and Lucia were not biological brother and sister. The prologue has two witches stealing a baby prophesied to be the greatest sorcerer in generations. And the first Limeros chapter we see has one of those witches talking about the 16-year-old girl's soon-to-be-revealed secret. Incest is supposed to be scandalous and taboo, but by revealing that they aren't biological siblings right out of the door, it ends up just being there. Maybe this is going somewhere long-term, but right now it just feels like, well, Game of Thrones had incest, so here's a kid-friendly version. There's also a lot of did not do the research. I know this point is one I will say a lot, but it comes up a lot. Horses are not cars. Horses are sprinters. They aren't endurance runners. They can gallop for maybe 2 or 3 miles before they have to stop or they are going to die. On average, a horse conditioned for long travel, they can cover 20 miles a day with a combination of trotting and walking. So when a story tells me that it is a 2-week round trip from the northernmost castle to the southernmost castle, assuming 2 days for talks and 6 days travel each way, that makes it a mere 120 miles between castles. Later it is said that Arrhanos' palace is only a mile from its border, so let's assume the same for Limeros, making the majority of the 120 miles the length of the country of Palisea. They are all roughly the same size on the map, so let's be generous and say the entire landmass is 360 miles from the most northern to the most southern points. The island of Ireland is 302 miles from north to south. Now you may ask why I know this was a mistake. At one point, Magnus has to make a 4-day round trip to kidnap Cleo. After he fails, he rides hard to get home in 2 days. Ride hard usually indicates a full gallop, about 55 miles an hour. First, that horse is dead. Second, assuming he only rode for 8 hours, that would be 440 miles. I know this is a small thing, just a few sentences in the whole story, but things like this really annoy me, mostly because Google exists. This sort of very basic research takes less than a minute, and it greatly affects the setting. As an author, you can't control your audience. That means facts matter, because when you have a reader who actually has knowledge on a subject, you're going to throw them out of the story. Speaking of doing the research, that's not how a siege works. I understand. It's a lot of fun to have armies clashing and blood splashing and men dying. It makes for a great climax. And sieges can be dull. You have 2 options for a siege. The first is to go over the walls, either by bringing them down with siege weapons like catapults and trebuchets and battering rams, or with ladders and siege towers. The The second is to set up camp outside the walls and keep supplies and people from leaving the city. This kind of siege is a waiting game. The attackers need to keep their soldiers supplied and from going AWOL. The defenders need to ration their supplies to prevent starvation, dehydration, and disease. You can also mix two up a bit. In no situation do the defenders leave their defensive wall until absolutely necessary. Under no situation do you bring cavalry to a siege. If you're bringing horses at all, it's to pull siege engines and possibly eat them later. Aranos has a walled palace. It's made of marble and gold, which is not the best defensive material, but it's still a wall. And the siege where the attackers brought cavalry and the defenders left their wall apparently lasted 12 hours. Again, Google is your friend. These sorts of battles only lasted a few hours. Just a chainmail shirt weighs 30 pounds. Now go to the gym. Alternate between running and punching a bag for 12 hours. No stopping, no water, no food. Yeah, you're gonna be pretty tired well before the 12 hours. The same applies to other people. Just as an example, look at mixed martial art matches, championship level. Arguably the best fighters in the world, and assumably some of the most physically fit. Those matches only last 25 minutes, with 5 rounds, with the rest of a minute between each round for water. And this is a sport that stops short of actually trying to kill each other. If they aren't going for hours on end, no other human is either. I'm going to put this on my third shelf. It's not a bad book. I'm not even against getting the rest of the series in the future. The world is interesting, and Cleo and Jonas are likable protagonists. But it does run hard against my pet peeve. Research is fairly easy in this day and age. Most of us carry the internet in our pocket. And even if you don't have personal access to the internet, library computers are still free. Thank you for your time. I know everyone's mileage will vary, so feel free to leave your thoughts.